the fake man Dan, and that fake podcast, was it the fake podcast?
Yeah, the fake Untitled podcast, as a matter of
Oh,
fact.
the fake Untitled podcast, right?
Yes,
That's it.
yes, indeed.
Okay.
Yeah, we kind of do
So,
general science and that sort of thing, and kind of take it from a more right leaning perspective because basically there's not really. I mean, there's you, but
mm,
there's you, and there's like a handful of grifters, and then there's the couple of people that go on Alex Jones that even
mm,
lean slightly to the right that have any kind of opinion on science. So
mm,
somebody's kind of
mm.
got to tackle that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I mean, that was just illustrated very, very disturbingly the last week, where Science, which is one of the premier journals for the world, right? Every library carries Science, AAAS, and they had a full-page editorial telling their audience, which is scientists, vote Biden.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
well, I'm not going to say it's unprecedented because a few months prior to that, Science, Nature, all ran op-eds telling scientists around the world to strike for George Floyd and more equality in the sciences.
Right.
And from my perspective, they've stepped out of uh, their realm, their wheelhouse, and are no longer a reliable source. It means that all their studies are tainted,
Well, they're
right? Because it's
subverted.
going
I mean, to put it
mm,
plainly.
very much so, and so um, science that is going to tend towards the controversial, and it doesn't matter which way you lean on the spectrum for controversial.
Oh yeah, it's basically just the consensus, be it left or right, is just
Yes.
you better fall down the line or you're some sort of crazy mad scientist and or idiot.
Mm. And actually dangerous,
Oh
right?
right, of
They
course.
will come after you because they want that consensus opinion held. Where I mean, I could see it happening when I began my science career, and I can remember my professors who guided me through the undergraduate and graduate process, them sort of complaining that it was getting worse. And this was before the real uptake of the network computing that everyone's used to. And, you still had to go down the library to get your references, and you'd have to photocopy the reference that you were interested in, etc. It was a much slower, more sedate uh, way of doing things. But in a way, I kind of miss the probably the more freeform speech and opinions that were able to be bandied around back then.
Yeah, in its way, this our communication and our connectedness has, for good and ill, for good and ill, it has put us all together. I've said this before. We've basically we've gotten access to the Akashic record, but we never expected that it would have all the lies too.
Yeah, very much. And the again, I'm short of answers in these conditions. I mean, all I can do is just say, wait, hang on a minute, it is wrong. It shouldn't be. Science shouldn't be working in this fashion, and somehow we need to turn around this Titanic battleship, whichever ship floats your boat.
Oh
Excuse the
yeah.
pun. And um, yeah, I'm dismayed by where we've come in 20 years, right? And because I could see the change. I lived through that change where everything started going online, and the universities started to get more and more subverted, and the STEM fields were isolated and insulated somewhat, but they're in the process of falling. And a good example I can give is the Society for Neuroscience. They have uh, a diversity leader now who's um, they've sent round reminders that, and they want you to fill out surveys, and they're intruding into the business of a lab where these things don't belong. And
That's the last place they belong, as a matter of fact.
yeah,
You need
yeah,
a critical mind, not critical theory.
yes, absolutely. And by all metrics, critical theory has been shown to be a failure. I challenge anyone to give me an example of where it's worked, and it's worked consistently across multiple domains.
Well, it
The only
does.
place it does,
Well,
well,
it's
so
it is good at subverting the West.
yeah, and mission accomplished then.
Right.
Um,
But, I mean, we'll leave that explanation to Yuri. He's better at explaining it anyway.
Yuri is the guest
Brezhnev?
speaker.
No, Brezhnev.
Oh, Yuri Bezdomov. Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, and to think that he 30 years ago sort of nailed this
Oh, laid out the
this
groundwork.
process. Yeah,
I just laid it
yeah,
out step by step, and I mean,
yeah,
we can watch and just lay each of those on a timeline.
mm, yeah. I think so.
Oh, but something I
Um,
think you'll be very interested in. We were talking about this actually just on our last show here is the replicability. I don't know which one it is.
mm,
The
mm,
replicability crisis in
yeah.
just across science.
Mm. Well, look, I have a particular take on that, and I do not like that Stanford guy Ioannidis, um, because he made very, very sweeping statements about science, where I think the criticism was should have been more precise, okay, and particularly where people are using methodologies every day, and for him to be saying 50% of science is non-reproducible, um, if you scratch down into that, it's more the sort of small scale clinical studies where the ends are low, or things like psychology, where that has proved the problem. But where things are more quantitative, um, I don't see a reproducibility issue. Right? Chemistry works here or in the United States.
Well, I think a
Um,
lot of this gets into the social sciences, like where there
yeah,
are
and
very real issues and very bad science. As a matter of fact, I'll link you up something directly here that my co-host got for me to follow up on last week from Fantastic Anachronism, specifically about social sciences and how to fix it, as it were.
what's wrong with social science and how to fix it? And like I say, this sort of fits with what I was saying, that the Ioannidis plus one paper, it should have been 50% replication issue in this domain or these domains, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it doesn't apply to the sphere that I work in
Well, the hard sciences,
neuroscience.
basically.
Yeah, hard sciences. I mean, there's ambiguity at the edges, but that's how you get to the data and how you interpret it. But this whole the phenomenon is there if you want to go and look for it and have the equipment. And yeah, I mean, look, I'm not gonna stand here and say he was wrong with pointing to the social sciences. Um, but my problem is that people have picked up on that and used it to sort of bash all science. And the
See where you're coming from with that.
it's a well, where I've had a problem with it, where by trying to deal with people who want to engage in the fantasy of viruses not being real. Okay,
I can
and
imagine.
these people have a whole bunch of talking points that they've got memorized. Uh, and I did, and that plus one paper sits squarely in the middle without realizing that it's well, it's the wrong tool for the job at hand. And there's been two issues that have bothered me this last year. One is the flippant dismissal. No, it's not even dismissal. I would say it's the concerted effort by people who are being less than honorable in dismissing the idea that SARS-CoV-2 has a lab-based origin. The second is what appears to almost, in my mind, look like a concerted psychological operation to undermine the public to distrust even the most fundamental things that we've, like no viruses. Did you have no idea how my inbox looks most days? Actually, last couple of weeks it's sort of calmed down a bit, but I imagine with Andrew Kaufman being beamed to Trafalgar Square, it'll start picking up.
Oh yeah, and we should I should actually bother to go into this since I haven't. This is Dr. Kevin McCairn for anyone that's listening in on my podcast, because I've been a terrible host and completely forgot to introduce him.
So it's just it's the best streams are where it's like just a conversation.
Absolutely.
Right, and don't worry about that. So yeah, if people want to find me,
yeah, no worries. Links will be below.
Yeah, and I'm eminently reachable, and unlike Andrew Kaufman, I won't charge you $1,000 an hour to give you opinion or help. And actually, I just want to put something out that came up. This is just a personal call out to
said too. Anyone who's going to be listening to me is probably not going to be familiar with Andrew Kaufman. So if you want, feel free to give a real quick dossier.
Sure. So I'm minding my own business. Well, no, I hadn't been minding my own business. I'd already been engaging in sort of chats on Discords about what a pandemic means, etc. And I was and what I was coming up against was sort of it was actually more sort of Chinese or sort of propaganda to try to sort of point the finger away from anything that would be happening in China. This was in the December, January, as things were beginning to ramp up. Okay. And as I'm sort of watching this, what comes across my radar was, and I can't remember how it got across my desk. It was, anyway, because I don't watch him, but it was Richie from Boston stream. I really, really dislike the guy. Maybe someone just sent me a link saying there's a virus is real. Might have just even been something like that. And I listened to this man, Andrew Kaufman, who is a psychiatrist, not very prolific one, who has a sketchy past. He had his license suspended for stealing Amazon gift coupons that were supposed to be used for payment towards people engaging in scientific studies. And I want to say that happened at Duke, maybe, medical school. But anyway, he got off to a shaky start, and then basically became involved in inventions of anti-suicide devices. And as someone who worked in the law, an advocate pushing for red flag laws.
Okay, well, that's creepy.
Yes, yeah, very much. And now he suddenly turned into this mouthpiece for the resistance in the United States to the idea that there's a pandemic coming, and there's a zeitgeist in the US which is always it's part of the revolutionary mindset, and that the government's coming to take you away to the FEMA camp, etc. I mean, there's many ways of sort of slicing and dicing that particular sausage of the American psyche. But anyway, the point being, he comes from absolutely nowhere. I've never heard of him before, and Richie from Boston is one of those big truther channels that you'll come across sort of if you're into that element of the conspiratorial. And I sit there and watch this man try and explain to people how viruses are not real. And in doing so, he uses electron microscopy as an example to try and show. First, he shows bacteriophages, which
Mm-hmm.
are viruses, by the way, as
Basically.
having a. Sorry?
Oh, basically, yeah. It's
Yeah, yeah.
more
Okay.
complicated than that. As a matter of fact, we went into bacteriophages and talked about. I don't know if you're aware. There's a modified bacteriophage that actually attacks SARS-1.
Oh, really?
Yes, effectively. It's
uh,
absolutely fascinating. It was genetically modified to do the task.
uh, yeah, I mean, the things they're doing with these molecular kits is um, always, always sort of leaves me uh, not shocked, but we're able to do amazing things. But anyway, Kaufman goes on to say that the bacteriophage, as they see here, and then uh, the coronavirus that is showed. So basically, he shows a bacteria with lots of coronaviruses on it, and I wonder if I can just find that picture because it does come from UCSF, and that'll come up on my screen. But and he showed that the bacteriophage clings to the let's see. Oh, yeah, there it is. So I'm bringing it up on my screen. And so it's basically a bacteria, got a whole bunch of bacteriophages on it. And he shows that as a bacteria infected with viruses. Okay. And by using that example, he then goes on to say, looking at a single sort of coronavirus or a couple of coronaviruses, literally the one from Wikipedia, that was a human cell, and the spike glycoproteins coming off uh, the virus itself was the equivalent of the bacteriophages on the previous image from UCSF and the bacteriophage, and it was such a high school error that I couldn't believe what I was listening to. And I would have probably ignored it had the Richie from Boston had 50 viewers, etc. But these were literally hundreds of thousands of. I don't know how big his audience really is, but he's been churning out videos for a long time, and he then starts pushing this idea that this pandemic is entirely fake and it's being used to push towards the one world government. Now, I would say that there's an argument. You can have an argument, a
Well,
discussion.
actually, let me just interject directly there and say,
Mm,
in the immortal words of Rahm Emanuel, you never let a
mm,
crisis go to waste.
exactly. And we had a long discussion yesterday about this, and I'm not averse to the idea that they would that they had contingency plans in place for such an event like this happening. And that's one theory. I tend to side with what I think is parsimoniously the more simple explanation, in that the Chinese, in conjunction with the People's Liberation Army and through our own stupidity and funding and corruption and the grift of scientists in the West, and they went on hunting missions to find these viruses, and it's in a sense went to look for the problem, right? And in effect, they need the problem in order to sort of justify the money that they're getting, and the money that they are getting is an obscene amount.
Well, yeah, it can
So,
absolutely be argued. Is it really ethical to do all these gain of function experiments on all these various things that probably will never actually evolve to such a state on their own? Like, are we not
mm,
just making weapons just to make weapons?
uh,
Maybe that's not the
yes,
best analogy,
yes, and
but You get what
Yes
I'm
and no. So
saying.
if you asked me as a scientific pursuit, should we be making specific manipulations to try to understand properties to this microbial world? As a scientist, I don't have a problem with that. What I'm having a problem with is um, how the public are being abused by multiple groups or networks of individuals. And like I say, whether it's cranks like Kaufman, who's going around telling people, and he picked up massive um, signal boosts at the beginning. And it wasn't until he was on the Billy Ray Valentine show. So shout out to TFR. But Billy Ray Valentine was the first um, presenter or someone who was interviewing him he wasn't going to softball him, and um, I'd been trying for probably a couple of months of trying to raise awareness. So every podcast that he went on, I would write to that podcast and say, please, you need a counter rebuttal to the things that he's saying because it's so obviously wrong, and I would just get silence. And I want to shout out to John Grisham as well, because he was trying to help set up a debate with Kaufman to say, because he kept saying, I'll debate my theory, his theory being one of terrain theory. And the and they were trying to do it with the Billy Ray Valentine show. I agreed. And he ran away. And Billy Ray, to his credit, and I hadn't even known this, had done some good due diligence and found that Andrew Kaufman had a shiny new website. And on the strength of him getting hundreds of thousands of views, had begun a medical consulting business where if you needed health advice from him, the minimum was $750, but that was absolute basic. You wouldn't take it because it was in no way a functioning package. So you were literally forced to go to the $1,000 package for 1 hour of a consultation, and a diary with which to note your progress, and I want to say some emails, and then it went up to 1750, and sort of
Good God.
built packages up like that. And Billy Ray just,
what a grift. Wow.
yeah, it's fucking amazing, right? And I
mean,
couldn't
you
believe
got to
that.
respect the game at least on some level.
Yeah, I guess it takes some. It takes some balls.
I mean, y'all some fucking real stones on that one. Wow.
Chutzpah, I think, is
Yes, I think that's exactly the word for it. Yeah.
He's but the thing is, he does come from the tribe, and his emblem on his website is a what do you call it? The sort of tree of life, Sephiroth. It's a sort of idealized Sephiroth, etc. And
yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, the Kabbalic tree of life. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and I've
So
just got
I
a
guess
comment.
he's shouting out a particular. What's the term that's ever so popular? Dog whistling. Yes, dog whistling.
Yeah. And well, I guess it's trying to make sure that his channel stays open. And he got a 7-day ban recently for impersonation. But the thing is, he's picked up enough of a crowd now that it is self-sustaining, and it's enough for him to obviously make a good living. How many consultations do you need to make a month to make sure your bills are paid? Not many. $1,000 an hour.
Yeah, no.
So again, shout out to John Brissom and Billy Ray Valentine for actually getting him into a position where, And this was right at the peak where people in the Bronx, in New York, so that's the poorer end of the people that are living there, those are the people that are confined to the public transport system, were basically falling over left, right, and center. Okay. And
And they were barely doing a
Billy
thing about
Ray,
it. That was a horror show.
yeah, and Billy Ray was seeing that. He was seeing that and have this man come on his show and basically tell Billy Ray that his eyes were lying to him. Right? And thank the Lord that, Billy Ray had the patience to have him sort of walk himself into a corner. And then Billy Ray went in and just said, you're charging XYZ. And, a lot of the complaint against a sort of allopathic medicine would be that it's there to keep you hooked to their drugs, etc., therapies, and that's a grift as well. And that's a conversation we can have, because that's a
matter of fact. I'm seeing someone in your chat that's mentioning that he was selling some sort of IV that was a cancer curing miracle.
No, that was another one who I was going after. No, I didn't really go after. So one was Rashid Buttar, and he grifted real big off the first Plandemic movie, and basically he would sell treatments of autism for vaccine injury, and was basically selling these IV drips with what do you call it? EDTA, chelating agent in it, and basically was saying that. Well, he would even, patients and parents whose children had been injured by vaccines, and this is an important part of the discussion. Vaccines, in some instances, cause harm, not all the time, but they do. Okay, and it's we kind of weigh the cost.
Absolutely. But, I'm wanting to actually do a whole show on that because it's such a heated topic, and I'd love for you to come back to actually just talk about that specifically, if that's something you're interested in.
I mean, I can try. I mean, I literally sit on the err on the side of caution with vaccines. I find it astonishing that in the United States that by the time the child has reached time to get into kindergarten, they've had upwards close to, I say, 72 shots, 74 shots. And although a science investigation would say, well, we've looked at MMR, it didn't seem to do anything. And there was one sketchy study in monkeys which appeared to show something, but there's no study as far as I'm aware, and this needs to be done with any and all vaccines because it's never been double blinded. Okay, we're just assuming that the small population studies that they do are reflective of the larger population. But what they need to do is they need ongoing studies of baby primates because that's the closest we can get. But I'm a very strong advocate of using primates and having these primates go through, or a control group go through the whole vaccine schedule that we are subjecting our children to. And as a scientist, you need to demonstrate to me that you've followed the scientific method and not be reliant on a vaccine claims court that is that's funded by the taxpayer. That's like we've reached a peak absurdity, and the same is happening with the SARS vaccine right now. And Jigs in our comments says, I denied my daughter Gardasil and taught abstinence while cleaning my gun. Salute to you, sir. And it's precisely the plan I'm going to use.
Personal responsibility. Amen.
So, that a lot of what these people are doing are taking discussions where there needs to be, they're heated discussions, and they're ruining it by bringing people, the terrainers in, who have a very specific ideology that they're trying to push as well. And it's nothing unique or new by saying terrain theory. They're basically just implying healthy tissue. Right? The healthier your tissue is, the harder it is to get infected. Okay, and the goal of sort of public health programs should be to lift as many people towards health as possible. I think vaccines can have a role to play in that, but the American system of, I'm not saying it's forced vaccination, but there's a lot of pressure on people for the kindergartens to have vaccine, for your child to go in to have vaccines, etc. And these are ways of, what would you say, coercing young parents into having treatment. It is a treatment, interventions that perhaps we're unsure of the cumulative effect.
Are you familiar with Dr. Robert Sears?
No.
He's a doctor out of, I want to say, Urbana, Illinois. He claims to have had 0 incidents of autism in his treatment of kids, and he uses a modified vaccine schedule. He extends it out over a much longer period, and I don't think he gives any of the multi-shots, and does each of the vaccine schedules individually to give the body time to adjust, from what I understand. And his claim is that he's been able to avoid largely any incident of autism in any of his children. Charges,
and
I guess.
I would say this. So with my children, my firstborn daughter, I did the same. They were all spaced out, individual vaccines, and she had what I considered the minimum, which was diphtheria, measles, mumps, rubella, and I think tetanus. And I about stopped there. My middle son, you could see he would come back from vaccines and he would just be zombified and be dribbling. And so I stopped. I said, okay, that's obviously not doing him any good.
Sure.
And my third child, who was very premature, I haven't given any vaccines to. It'll be up to him when he's adult. And I'm of the opinion that vaccines are a miracle if you live in the Sudan and measles is taking out 1/3 of your newborns a year, right? You might want to have a vaccine to hand, or a functional polio vaccine, because you're suffering paralytic polio in 20% of your children, right? Who don't have access to the critical care facilities in the West that we do. But I do think in 99.9% of the cases that acute care in the West with allopathic medicine would most likely get you through any sort of crisis with a infectious disease. And the like I said, I'm not I want good vaccines, right? And the other thing that I would like is that the if there's damage, that there is a way to get compensation, right? And the problem is, in the US, it's just a very messed up system right now.
Oh, you would be hard pressed to get any kind of compensation from that, much less someone to even acknowledge that a problem exists to be compensated in the first place.
Right. And the thing is, right now, this is my understanding of the US, is that should you have a reaction to a vaccine, you've got to get brain scans and some sort of proof within a week of the vaccine, something like that. Now, in a child that can't talk, how do you know, right? And it's crying a lot. If you're a parent, kids cry.
Yeah, as the parent, you might know because you can see the difference. But I mean, that's you with your baby, and that's going to be very subjective. So, I mean, how are
Yeah,
you going to get someone from the state to know or believe, for that matter?
yeah. And the thing is, there's a grift going on there because every injection that's sold, the doctor, that's a little bit towards his yacht, or the paying off of his debts.
Well, I mean, we
And
can just look at how the Sadlers fucked America with opiates. Here,
uh,
have more, more. No, 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 no. You
right.
need more. You don't need less. You don't need treatment. You need more opiates.
And how did something like when did codeine not be sufficient for most chronic pain? This is what people need to ask. And so just because they patented a delivery system that could give a much higher, uh, I mean, literal diamorphine, but released slowly, and to think that that was going to be safe once people realized they could just crush it up and either snort it or whack it into a vein. To think that that would be a good idea, and something like codeine, which is a much safer, well tolerated compound, would have done just as well, right?
And
You,
had for how long? You know,
I'm
quite some
sorry.
while. I mean, it had done for quite some while. At least, I mean, codeine, even in abusers, codeine
Mm.
has been a thing since, I'm going to say, at least the 80s.
Oh, I mean, it's always been there. I mean, I mean, obviously from morphine, you went. I want to say in the 30s they made a whole bunch of analogs. Now maybe it was even before. Let me just check that. But heroin, I think, was because
Oh,
that's
yeah, that's an old
diamorphine.
one.
Yeah, I want to say
I
that
want to
was
say
early
heroin's the
19.
20s
Let's just
offhand. I
see.
could be completely wrong, though.
Codeine discovery, and it might even just be a. Was discovered in 1832 by Pierre Jean Robiquet, and well, let's just see what Wikipedia has to say about it. I wonder if it's a natural component of the plant. It has to go through um, uh, some metabolism to make it active. Da, 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 da. Who uses chemistry? Let's see. Uh, but yeah, I mean, why is the US having a opioid epidemic in the 1990s, 2000s? I mean, it doesn't, all that is them making finding another market, and it was enough for them to, well, it's serving a role, it's a new medicine, everyone's getting kickbacks and making money on it, and it just got out of control. And this comes down to, again, and like I say, I love the United States. I do. I wish I was sitting there, but usually Montana or Idaho is was my dream to end up being in. But um, the the fact that you can take something as pernicious as the oxycodone and then substitute all those other working medications and have that be the primary go-to pain medication from a bad back to a broken bone. It didn't make any sense, and so that's kind of indicating that your system is broken.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
And I would extend that further to, if I look at the US right now, I've made the argument that in winning the Cold War and the blind trust to the idea of free markets and how the free market magically fixes all, and what the free market needs is rewarding and indulging people's desires. And I think that's become distorted. And I would argue that the US right now is very much in the situation that the Soviet Union was in the late 80s, as the move towards the Berlin Wall was coming down, and it came down because of the contradictions of the system under which it found itself. And right now, the US is it's struggling with the contradictions of its own systems and ideologies. So, using the example we spoke about earlier, which was that gentleman from Nebraska, where that story went. But there was a man who was doing what should be the
He was
birthright of
performing the
every
American
American.
ideal. I mean, he was the very model of what a successful American citizen should be. A veteran.
Mm.
He comes back, he starts a business.
Mm.
That is the American story.
Yeah. And now gets dragged through the courts. He's chased by the Marxist insurrection mob, and well, I find suicide a difficult topic to sort of navigate around. I've lost my best friend to suicide, and sometimes I often think of it as a selfish thing to do. But
I agree.
If he feels that his country had disintegrated to such a point that he would do that to himself, yes,
Well, to
I
give
would
it a
say
little
that
bit more context, too, it's not just that. It's what was coming down on the guy. They were looking to give him about some kind of $1 million bail. They were trying to throw the book at him, and he had been indicted, so the charges were going to come through. He was going to go to jail, despite the fact that this had initially been ruled as a self-defense shooting. So, they completely upended the man's life after having promised that, after telling the man he did nothing wrong, they then go back and just completely turn that on its head, and not only say you did completely wrong, and not only that, you have to pay for the sins of all your people, really.
Yeah, and it's something I keep speaking to. I started this channel talking about, say, the grifters, etc. But it's pivoting away as we've learned the biology of SARS-CoV-2, and we can get into the more ugly side of how people are using it. But I'm spending more and more of my time, and that's because of the circumstances of the riots, of basically making social commentary on the United States and this, like I say, a country I hold very dear. I had very wonderful time there. I literally wish I'd been able to stay there.
Well, we were once the shining city on the hill,
Yeah,
and there is still that glimmer, and there are those that would rebuild the fallen pillars that held us there, but there are the other ones that are notching away and burning down those pillars at almost the same rate as they're being rebuilt.
Yeah, and again, it's come. I would urge people to look at the contradictions that come from the ideology that would give such wealth disparity. And I know that science sounds a little communistic in saying that, but we had a
Well, the
very,
U.S.
very good
used to crush monopolies. Because, well, to put it simply, in my own point of view, is that the free market is a good thing in and of itself, but it needs to be tempered, because, like anything on this earth, it's run by people. People can just be shitty. People are greedy, and they can just be awful. So you need someone there that can just this is what checks and balances are for. That's why America was able to survive so long as it has, because of the built-in systems to relieve those pressures and, put accountability where it is supposed to exist. Much of that has been dismantled, which is incredibly unfortunate, and has really done the whole world a deal of harm. But, we're kind of trying to fix it. I have some hope.
Well, as sad as it sounds, I'm almost coming round to the idea of the accelerationists, that it's perhaps use this opportunity to let the system. Tell me a system that isn't corrupted in the West. Okay,
That's a fair
and
point.
right, and so instead of trying to patch it, is to let it fail, and then we can see the failures. Let the failures be visible for everyone to see, and say we have to stop this happening again. And if that comes down to us being more circumspect with who we make our allies, our business partners,
And the nature of
and
those
I,
alliances, for that matter.
mm, and I sit very much on the spectrum of nationalist. I've got records going back that prove I put my money where my mouth was a long time ago, and I got doxxed before it was cool, right? Because I was offended at the idea of English girls being mass gang raped by Muslims in the
Yeah, we
UK.
haven't even touched on any of the issues that are specific to the UK, but there's such a laundry list of things that have gone completely
Mm,
wrong just at a base level with the social contract in the
mm.
UK. Like
Yeah, and
it's all broken down.
I would say that what's happening in the US right now is basically what happened in the UK 30, 40 years ago. The problem is that in America, they've got to break that element of the individual, the idea of going again, or being
American exceptionalism.
viscerally opposed. Sorry?
American exceptionalism.
Yes, yeah, and there's a distinct mistrust of the anything that would be considered collectivism or communitarianism, etc., and rightly so. I'm fully I'm fully on board with that. But I think that has to work within national boundaries, right? And that's what I would want for the UK. And I think because I live in Japan right now, and Japan is a nice place to live. You know why? Because it has pretty free markets. I can go and, if I wanted to, if I had the money, I could go shopping, get pretty much anything that I want, even though we're living on the edge of the world. But it's a safe place to live
And yes, you could walk
because it's
home with what you just bought.
yeah, yeah, and
We could
no one's going to do it.
we could safely say that all the schools in Japan are basically good schools.
Yeah, yeah, and they
At
have not
him,
been
at
subverted
him,
yet.
at him.
Mm. There is no push for tranny story hour at 5 years old. There's no push for sex education to young children. There's no. There's very much. It's how I remember the UK being 40 years ago,
Well, I mean,
and I'm
it's
hoping.
how I
Well,
remember the U.S. being not even that. I mean, I got when I was in elementary school, there was the nearest we might learn something about that would be, something we might go over in a book, and then it's going to need some
mm,
context.
mm,
But
yeah,
there was none of that. Now, middle school, I think it was starting to get in, but then it was your classic, the boys go to the watch the video, the girls go watch the other video, and then you get some lessons about. Well, at that point, it was STDs because VD was out of style by then, but you get the
mm,
idea.
yeah,
And it's
and
just gotten real creepy and real weird about the middle 90s. I'd say was
mm,
kind of when you really saw that kind of sink its teeth into the earlier education.
mm. Well, I think that came with the hyperconnectivity of the internet, where uh, you know deviancy generally is self-contained in isolated communities, right? It's hard for it to get out, and the impact on people is going to be minimal, especially once it's established they know who is doing
Well, you look at the old stories of Hollywood. Hollywood has been Hollywood forever. And we've
mm,
all basically known, it's all the open secret. And I don't think we need to go into specifically what open secret, because we all know that almost 99% of every single living thing in Hollywood is a complete degenerate.
mm, yeah. But that's how they get you, right? And I've always made the point that in in a culture where the material needs are taken care of so efficiently, you need some way to hook your your talent,
You need adventure.
right? And you can't do it like Eastern Germany through fear. So what do? You start indulging people, their their peccadillos and their um, wants and needs. And often what you find is that most people have uh, damage somewhere in their psyche, and there's a lot of. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in psychodynamic theory and sort of, but there's a neuroscience of reward, okay, and it's
Oh, and
strapped onto
it's
that
been
basic.
quite refined and tied
Yes.
directly into propaganda and media. And propaganda
Mm.
isn't even really a thing anymore. It's just called marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a way, and you voluntarily take it, right? Because you go to that content, right? The reason that people are listening to us is because they've made a conscious choice to listen to something that appeals to them at an intellectual and emotional level. Now, that's if you want a better expression, want to weaponize it, that's what the marketeers done. And once you start getting that big data with huge numbers that they did start doing with mass advertising campaigns, etc., then they start building databases. They know what does and doesn't work, and then they refine it in ever more uh, spectacular and subtle ways. And um, I, again, I don't have answers to these except perhaps be aware. And I'm not the best example, right? My kids play tablet too much, but then I also see the benefits of them being very computer literate. If I think back to how I was at that age,
Well, we come
right?
back to my earlier completely esoteric comment. I mean, we're all connected to the Akashic Record.
Right.
We're all tied in. We're one mind, we're one people now.
Mm,
And unfortunately, we've got a lot of crazies. And double unfortunately, we're not doing anything about it anymore. So they're infecting this group consciousness that could be the greatest boon of mankind
mm,
with drivel, madness, and bile.
mm. Yeah, and rewarding them,
Indeed,
right? So
indeed we are.
so
And
even
defending
under
them for
the
that matter.
So you can, it's quite okay for you to go and kick in the storefront, and I'm no fan of gross commercialism, but the people that are doing it and coming out with handfuls of training shoes that probably only cost a couple of dollars to make anyway are in a sense they're victims of this very, very well honed machinery that gets into their mind and makes and gives importance to these uh,
Trinkets.
frivolous items.
Trinkets and
Yeah,
baubles.
trinkets. Yeah, and and those that are in control of it, they're they're literally laughing all the way to the bank, and you're enabling their if there's substance to the idea of pandemic, there's substance to the idea that you're going to be uh, constrained to smart cities in green new smart cities where your social score is going to uh, impact the availability of services to you. Okay, you're helping them every step of the way by engaging in this dialectic at the moment. And I'm one of the things I say every day. I stream nearly every day. I try to. and from the beginning, I've been warning people: do not do not physically get involved in this first wave, right? Because even with SARS-CoV-2, with it seemingly, hopefully going away, and hilariously, there was a article from Bill Gates, and it almost comes across as a drat it article, right? Like, drat it, we underestimated the utility of masks to halt the spread of infection.
Oh,
Because
on that
I
on that
think,
exact note, it was, and I believe Robert Redford, the American CDC director, just
mm,
recently said. I know I'm going to quote him wrong, but I'm going to try and paraphrase it right. That masks. Oh, what was it? A vaccine is good, but masks
mm,
are our best tool.
mm,
I mean, is that not
yeah.
patently ridiculous? Like, obviously, the
Uh,
vaccine is the key to this. I mean, masks are great, sure, but we want to get people an immunity.
well, you have to get immunity. So this is a discussion that's complex, and you have to be careful about which facet you catch onto first to get to something according to a base reality. Now, I said from the beginning, and another thing that sort of pulled me off my couch to be speaking publicly was not just the likes of Kaufman, but was the very um, over nonsensical response of the CDC and the Surgeon General standing up in front of the American public and saying, you do not need masks, right? While at the same time, what they were doing was trying to grab every bit of PPE that they could for the first line services. And I think this whole thing could have gone radically different if he'd stood up there and said, we're not sure what this thing is coming out of China. Um, and I'm pretty sure, as much as the records show that there was a release back in October, it was probably known at the higher levels that that was the case. It should have just been honesty of
Absolutely.
everything.
Well, I mean,
And
you look at South Korea and you look at Taiwan. You look at Taiwan specifically. They did
mm,
this right because they intrinsically distrust the Chinese, as well
mm,
any sane nation should.
mm, yeah.
And they locked
Well,
down immediately, and they were completely honest with their people. Hey, we've got this thing going on. We don't know what it is. We know it's deadly, and we know you need to do the right thing. So let's show you a
mm,
couple things that you can do to help.
mm.
I mean,
And
that's
that
just
was,
reasonable.
yeah. And that those steps weren't taken in the US, in the West, and in that vacuum came the terrain grifters. Okay, and that started to fill up the uh, the the mind bubblegum that you scroll through on YouTube, right? I mean, we're all of us listening to this. If you're not stuck with a bullshit job, or you're out of the working populace like myself, you're at the bottom. And what do? We watch streams and stuff on YouTube, right? And
I mean, even me, I'm completely cut off from the. I am what you would call a cord cutter. The only media I get that's modern media is either from YouTube, from a stream, which I mean that's not really, or from the radio. And the
mm,
radio is that's all local, and local news is generally actually news.
mm,
I mean, there's
yeah,
always going to be spin, but it's a local spin in that case as opposed to the national garbage.
yeah, and but there's an element to that to which you have to be aware in that when you've cut the cord, and I did that many years ago. You self-select for information that resonates with you.
Indeed, you can
Okay,
end up in a
and
bubble. You can end up in a worse
yes,
bubble than some of these social justice warriors, to put it
yeah,
plainly. And that's where you can get a guy
uh,
like Andy Kaufman.
yes, and look, I've just received this comment right now. It just popped up on my inbox, saying about, well, so recently David Icke tried to grab onto this finding with the Pasteur Institute's PCR, where the reverse primer that they use for the detection. If you read it in the wrong direction, it matches a sequence on chromosome 8. Okay, and he went on David Icke, so that's a reach to millions and millions of people, and said, "See, haha, they're just detecting human genetic material." Right? And so just right now, this minute, just popped up on my inbox. I get quite a few of these a day. He's called Free Basket Living. He says, "You showed nothing. I was hoping you would in such a way that all, or at least most, would comprehend, but you did and continue to do nothing to educate or teach. You giggle at your own lack of ability to positively influence towards a truth that brings about cohesion. I say, people, trust yourself and that which you see and experience in your reality." So basically, trust people like Kaufman who are telling you that things like viruses aren't real because you can't see them. Okay, and there's a spectrum that you're dealing with here today.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
good
This
friend.
is a spectrum that is being dealt with. People on the spectrum,
Yeah.
even.
um, maybe. uh, it's belief and ideology, and people have different ones, and vive la différence, usually I would say, but when it's so obviously scientifically misconstrued, and like a trained artist sees the splatterings of a teenage graffiti artist and turns their nose up. Anyone who's had the time and discipline to work through and become expert in a scientific domain looks at things like what that person said and what someone like Kaufman has said uh, as an assault against the senses, because it is so wrong. And as human beings, I think we're drawn towards, we want harmony and symmetry in our perceptions. We want a sort of inherent beauty, and truth is part of that, right? If you hit a ground truth, then you're at a point where you can begin to then unravel some of the mess and bring a bit of order to some of the chaos that's running through your maybe your mind, your community, and right now in most cities, down your main streets, wielding lasers, Molotov cocktails, and all and sundry of weapons.
It
And
really does put a new spin on the statement of shining a light into the dark corners.
well, you mean the lasers or the?
Either way, a lot of roaches scattering.
Yes, yeah, I guess. And so I was talking about this spectrum of belief, and so my friend Jonathan Cooey, I highly recommend him. Go listen to JC on a Bike if you want another well thought out take to the elements. And it's not the orthodox take either, right? He's not afraid to ask the awkward questions, and so where him and a group are dealing with this origin story to SARS-CoV-2, and I think they've been doing a brilliant job, that we're able to catch these people in the act, as it were. Whereas if the internet, we're sort of bemoaning the issues with connectivity, etc. If we didn't have the internet and something like this had gone ahead, we would just be stuck with newspapers. And one of the reports that we went over yesterday was the Daily Telegraph from the UK, extolling let me see if I can just find it, the fact that British scientist Peter Daszak will be part of the Lancet team, this international team, to investigate the origins of SARS-CoV-2. Now, if you've been following the story in any way, the fact that Peter Daszak would be involved with investigating the origins of SARS-CoV-2 where he is up to his eyeballs in, excuse me, in misdirection and pushing the idea that it's a spillover zoonosis, right? And we've developed
And let me clarify for those in my audience who might not get that, to say that this is basically a natural occurrence or a very, very light touch modification kind of thing.
Not even a light touch. I mean, are you speaking about
I mean,
SARS-CoV-2 in particular?
Yeah, potentially. Now, by the zoonotic methodology,
right? So any adaptation and gain of function was just part of the zoonotic
just something
process,
that happened.
Right?
Like it was just a natural evolutionary process, which, if we look at just how good this thing is at infecting humans, it strains credibility, you know?
Yes, it does. And on many, many levels, there's this disturbing tendency towards peak adaptation that we wouldn't normally expect, even if we had a spillover, a naturally occurring spillover event like DASAC, like EcoHealth, like all these groups would want you to believe happened. Okay, and we have to. But let me just sort of preface this with this group. My good friend Jonathan is part of discussion groups that have been at the orthodox way of dealing with this, at the scientific method. I made a conscious decision at the beginning because I'm out, I'm not working, I'm at home, that I didn't need to do that. And basically anything I said with respect to the COVID zombie hypothesis, it gets into the brain, it's going to do unusual things. It would be better to highlight that and sort of throw my
well, that's in your wheelhouse.
It is, but basically, I'm throwing my credentials onto the fire of public opinion and the dumpster fire that is this whole effort around SARS-CoV-2. But I was so convinced of what it was that I was seeing, and I could track it very easily and lay it over with my research, that me writing a paper about it would be read probably by a couple of people in the world, whereas I've reached thousands of people right now by trying to one, counter the narratives coming from those who would say viruses aren't real, but two, also saying that as well as there being these snake oil salesmen, there are others in the professional sphere who are engaged in the same, and we have their paperwork to hand, we have their appearances to hand, and we shouldn't let them just walk away with all the prizes that they've won over the last few months, and that includes very, very serious, amounts of funding.
Oh, absolutely.
And let me give you a perfect example of that. So, as the pandemic began to unfurl, it became clear that EcoHealth, the non-profit from New York, had been working hand in hand with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And
just to clarify, is this the organization that Fauci is affiliated with?
Yes, he is. Well, he's not like professionally or accredited to them.
No, not professionally, like commercially.
No, this is Gilead. You're talking about Gilead, the remdesivir maker.
Okay, I thought he had some sort of financial connection to one of the Wuhan labs.
You'd have to point me to a bit of evidence.
I'll have to look that up. I'll link you later if I can find it. I've just kind of heard about it. But anyway, please continue.
Okay, so well, in a way, he does have linkage to it, because what he did was his NIAID, his institute of
Mm-hmm.
part of the NIH, authorized grants that were handled by EcoHealth Alliance, and EcoHealth Alliance was then distributing this money to look for these pathogens, so funding studies in bats and giving money to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And there's a very, once you start digging, there's a very clear network of people who are involved. And Peter Daszak, because of the NPO, he's outside the university system. He can sort of operate with a degree of impunity that perhaps would be more difficult for someone that has institutional ties.
Well, he's not
But
really in the system, so he doesn't have that kind of oversight.
right, right, and but somehow he's got a pipeline to the NIH. I'm guessing as being registered as an American nonprofit, even though he's Ukrainian British descent. We have evidence now that he's been involved with the London Jewish diaspora. So there can be plenty in the background to suggest that his motives and goals are not those of conservation as pushed by the the promotions of eco health. So anyway, in the last, it was formed in 2009, 2010, and in that time period, it's received over $140 million from the US taxpayer in the form of various grants, from Health and Human Services to NIAID to being part of the Predict program. And you have to be asking yourself, how come this person and this group of people have been able to garner so much research, and how come they're doing it in the front yard of essentially an ideological enemy like the Chinese Communist Party? Okay, now once you pinpoint Peter Daszak in this network, so EcoHealth, what you see is that very, very quickly, as the pandemic begins to spread out, the a conclusion is reached very, very quickly in the professional scientific press, which is that it had to be zoonosis. Okay, and Peter Daszak, within weeks, had a paper in the Lancet again in I want to say January, February. Let me just see if I can find that one. And then what happened was there was a paper released which everyone goes to when there's talk of there being the chance of it having leaked from a laboratory. And that paper is called The Proximal Origin of SARS-CoV-2, and the first and corresponding author is Christian G. Anderson. And people have tried to say, well, this, and in that paper, basically it says that, well, it can't be an engineered virus because its binding to the ACE2 receptor could be more efficient than what we see. No engineer would do that. That's sloppy, is their argument. And two, the receptor binding motif has cross similarity or synonymous with the receptor binding motif you find in pangolins. And so the pangolin hypothesis was born. I call it the Wookiee hypothesis because it doesn't matter which. They're just trying to find an intermediate to say it. It's contingent on having an intermediate for the theory to work. And yet everyone bought it hook, line, and sinker. And it didn't address even a couple of sentences to the prospect of it being a lab-based agent, other than to say that it can't be. Okay, and then what they do is they compare to the released paper. So the head of the laboratory at the Wuhan Institute, Zhengli Shi, people know her as Batwoman. She released in, I want to say, February, a Nature paper. So these are all big papers coming out. The proximal origin was Nature Medicine. She released a Nature paper which said that, look what we found. We looked for, based on the sequences released by clinicians worldwide, we've searched our databases and we find a viral particle called RATG13, which seems to have some of the, or has a lot of crossover with SARS-CoV-2, 96% homology, but with the difference being in the spike protein complex. And so it's that push is being used by anyone. So the fact checkers. So in last week or this week, I want to say no, it's Monday for me, so it's last week. We had the release from the Hong Kong whistleblower. Now, I've been a bit incredulous to her. You can go back and listen to my earlier streams. I always felt something didn't quite sit right with me. But if she's done one thing, it's raised in the people's consciousness that there could be a synthetic component to SARS-CoV-2. And in my mind, that's a good thing. Now, is it the mechanism that she describes in the paper that she released as a sort of preprint in association with a group linked to Gao, Voice of Guao, whatever his name is, the Chinese billionaire who's linked to Steve Bannon? And that was a very big failing in my view, because it hindered its objectivity for the public to be able to look at it.
You could very well say that would taint that in the public eye.
Yeah, for sure. And what it's done is those that had been working very, very hard to bring the message that the molecular biology of SARS-CoV-2 in terms of virology seems off, and there's one postdoc at MIT, her name's Alina Chan, has worked very hard to say that the puzzle pieces don't fit. Now, like I say, I'm not a molecular biologist, I'm not a geneticist, I'm not a virologist, I'm a systems neuroscience scientist. And what brought me into this was what I saw as the obvious neurological impact. I saw it straight away. And unless you know what you're looking for, it's difficult to see. But the problem that we have right now is that you basically have two non-overlapping magisteria in the molecular biology domain, and someone like myself who's systems neuroscience and behavior, and being able to talk to one another. So as we establish that SARS-CoV-2 has this neurotropic element, the gain of function, the biggest gain of function which the virus has, which is the polybasic furin cleavage site. And if you take that sequence of amino acids, is synonymous with a whole bunch of neurotoxins, but primarily rabies and cobra neurotoxins. And these act as cholinergic antagonists. Now, this then leads to the issue of what I tongue-in-cheek called the COVID zombie. And
go into that if you would, because I know exactly what you're talking about, and I hope some people that are going to be listening on my side will, but this really hasn't been delved into enough, and we've only just touched on my podcast.
Okay. So, uh, in a nutshell, what I saw was a repertoire of behaviors that I reproduce in the laboratory systematically, and I see in the clinic for intervention with deep brain stimulation uh, a set of behaviors that can essentially be called Touretteism. And the uh, 20, 30 years ago, we had very, very little understanding of why Tourette's manifested the way that it did. And we've reached a point now where actually we do have a good, solid understanding of the networks. And if you perturb those networks, you see like I say, depending on where you perturb them, you'll see specific behaviors manifest. And like I say, once you see it, you can reproduce it in a monkey. You can, when you see it being done in the human, it's striking, and you can't unsee it. Okay, and that's the sign that you've got a good model. And so one of my sort of claim to fames has been, along with it was an international effort, but to develop this reproducible model of Tourette's. And in Tourette's, it's not just the tics that you get, and it's famous for the phenomenon of something called coprolalia, which is like the swearing, the inappropriate swearing at the wrong time. But along with swearing, there are other really standout behaviors that you see in the lab and in the clinic, which is spitting and licking. Okay. And as we've begun to sort of tease apart these networks, and we can look at the limbic networks of the higher primate, and this is something very, very few people have had the experience to observe like I have firsthand. I was the sort of last monkey researcher standing, but that's gone by the way. And the thing that started to stick out for me was all these people that were spitting and going into rage-like phenomenon coming out of China, right? So you'd see people spitting on elevator buttons, arguing, and people spitting,
Yeah,
etc.
that is
And
really. I mean, we do see some weird actions out of Chinese people, just kind of anecdotally as tourists. But in the native in the native land, we really wouldn't see that sort of thing because there's a really strong social contract, you might say, that they have there, even if it's enforced by an iron hand. They there's a way that you act, and that is highly alien to what it would be.
yes, and the thing to understand is that spitting is a universal phenomenon and is often used in displays of disgust. And this is where I would sort of call the overlap with Tourette's. And how I started to define this was that um, because the disease is a neurotropic agent, it's able to bind to the olfactory epithelium. It propagates up the olfactory bulbs, and the olfactory system is part of the limbic system and sits at the heart of the limbic system because smell is such an important um, sense for your survival, right? So you need to be able to smell food, etc., and or you need to be able to. So one thing is you need to be able to smell if something is bad, right? And the feelings of disgust, okay, and spitting in fighting is normal. Primates do that as well, and that, like I say, these are complex behaviors to tease apart, especially if you're not experienced with them and haven't worked at them firsthand. at a scientific or clinical level. But you're going to have to sort of trust me that these do manifest in very reproducible ways. And what we're seeing, so let me try and make it a bit more concrete for the listeners who are hearing this for the first time. Okay, so there's this concept of there being a neurotropic agent, which means it's able to get into the nervous system. Okay, and once in the nervous system, it's able to propagate along axons and fibers of passage, and it will jump from neuron to neuron. And that's the classic description of rabies. And that has a very fixed time interval in which it will passage from the first network, primary, secondary, tertiary networks that become infected. And what I was seeing, I saw parallels with rabies. Okay, so in the lab we use rabies scientifically to map neural networks. Okay, and in this instance, you get a nice monkey at the beginning of the procedure, but as the rabies does its job tracking the networks, what was a nice monkey basically has rabies rage at the end of it. Now, I was seeing something akin to that, coupled with these Touretteisms, which was the spitting and the licking behaviors. And we built up I've had my Discord nuked a few times, but we built up quite a good library of people just engaging in these behaviors in the most inopportune ways. And of course, people get into conflicts all the time. But what kept leaping out at me was suddenly there was all these people spitting, right? And
I have to agree with you too. I've noticed that it's an oddly more common occurrence in no, I don't want to say conflicts, but in confrontations with people, like, or coughing, even for that matter, like specifically coughing.
Yep. And the question you have to ask yourself is, well, why does that happen? Well, it's because you're kicking in the limbic system under those tense situations, and in that that's a scary enough place to be generally, even under normal conditions. But you have to think about the fact that, and this is more and more studies are coming out by the day, and there's a recent one that came from Yale. It's a big international study, and they've been able to show that SARS-CoV-2 infects organoids, so these are derived from stem cells. It infects mouse brain, and they've found it in human neural tissue in cortical regions, and they've been able to show that it's able to propagate and divide and reproduce itself without killing neurons. What it does do, however, is it lowers the oxygen available to other neurons. So there's kind of like a sort of hypoxic zone around where the infection takes a hold. And I can tell you it takes very, very little to manipulate those networks to produce the Touretteisms. So how do I do that in a scientifically reproducible way? Well, you get very precise stereotaxic coordinates of your model system, and then you get a fine cannula into the brain, and you micro inject a couple of microliters of a disinhibitory compound, and then the whole behavior of the animal flips over. And that's an example par extremis, but you had to try to think of the same thing occurring where you've got this oxygen debt, lactic acid is building up because you've got this essentially quiescent infection ongoing in the brain, and then causing people. So I defined SARS-CoV-2, the neuropsychiatric components of it, as essentially a loss of impulse control. because that's primarily what Tourette's is, right? That's where you get the inopportune, or the behaviors are inopportune moments. And it's a tough message to get out because, one, people, it's a scary prospect for people to think that there's something that could hijack their behavior in this way, and it could be something that's subtle almost, that it would be hard to detect in yourself. So there's a lot of, so let's try and sort of step out and sorry, look at a big picture view for a second. Okay, so I've
Sure.
tried to walk people through the fact that there's a bunch of people who are saying it's zoonosis, it's just natural, where in fact there's a lot of evidence which says that it's come from a lab, it's part of gain of function studies, and if it's gain of function studies, it falls under dual use technologies. And they could make the argument we were making vaccines, but it could also be that they were making something approximating a biological agent. That
Certainly.
biological oh yeah,
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
is
I
and
mean,
so
easily, even for that matter.
yes, easily. And once you've got something, a spillover pandemic is bad enough because there isn't the immunity to the agent itself, so that's how you get things like pandemic flu, etc. But in this case, we can look at what is very, very likely. It's 99.999% sure that it's a gain of function made with this furin cleavage, and that furin cleavage with the amino acids it has in it is synonymous with neurotoxins. It's a family of neurotoxins, cholinergic antagonists, and you've got yourself into a position now where you've got this highly infective agent that's able to rip through a population. It targets multiple organs, including the brain, and is very, very difficult to pin at a clinical level in terms of its pathology. Right, so there's clusters that we know are sort of gastrointestinal weighted to those that have more respiratory, and we're seeing that the gastrointestinal types turn into the long haulers. And there's another component that I think just needs to be taken into account, that this virus, there's papers that have come out that have shown it's able to suppress pain processing at the level of the spinal cord. So even if you were feeling ill, you might still feel generally well and in good fine feckle, to pinch an
So that is to
aphorism.
say,
And
you think you're asymptomatic when, in fact, you may not actually be.
right, and then you're going around spreading it. And one of the things there was something that I called the COVID gate, which was you kind of notice people when they're not, and they're engaging in these types of behaviors, the spitting, the licking, is they get a swagger, right? And it looks a bit like they're drunk a little bit, right? And it's all part of the behavioral profile that you need to keep in mind. And we need to be able to explain that in as coherent as manner as possible, so as many people as possible can take measures to mitigate against it. Now, this is why I'm saying we have to take this, so stepping back and taking a big picture view. And the range of opinion that exists is one from viruses don't exist to in the United States, them asking you to wear a mask is,
Take the mark of the beast, as it were.
yeah, well put, thank you. Um, and anything and everything in between. And then you've got the professional people who are supposed to be ethically bound to help the public, grifting these projects, like they say, the Peter Daszaks, etc., and we'll probably have to do this over sort of several streams. It's such a
Oh
complex.
yeah, there's a lot,
Uh,
lot to unpack in all this.
yeah, and I'm trying to do sort of 9 months of following this story packed into taking 20 years of hands-on research and publication and wrapping it up into what essentially sounds like a science fiction story. And the problem is though that it's not fiction, it's fact. And that the the situation has evolved to where if you're trying to speak about the science facts, they're now calling you a conspiracy theorist, right? So that's, you take the release from Yang Li Men. I'll never remember the name, but that publication, which does this very sophisticated way of how you would build this pathogen. Okay, and my concern at the time was, well, does it have to be made that way? And this was something that my good friend Jonathan has sort of discussed as well, that by making this very complex pathway to making this agent, it allows for individuals, particularly those that want to argue for the zoonotic hypothesis, and if they get their way, they put everyone at risk, they grift a whole bunch of money, and they don't care if you catch it or not. You just become more grist for their mill. And excuse me, the the issue is that within the literature, there's an event which occurred in 2012 where 6 miners from Yunnan province and Moyang, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, mine, and they presented with a SARS-like illness. And it was kind of published and sort of blamed on monoxyvirus, and it kind of went quiet. But the suspicion is that it's that virus which they're taking and using and saying is rat G13, and rat G13 rat G13 that they want to say is bat, pangolin, etc. But now we've got these humans who have acted as part of the passaging mechanism, right? So there's a way in
I've got to be honest, that's an incredible reach.
The mind story.
Oh yeah, to try and tie this back to that.
Um,
Now, not to say that it's unreasonable. I mean, I would actually be surprised if they didn't keep samples of something like that on hand.
For sure, they kept samples, and the problem is that the only publication about the mining incident was a master's thesis in Italian. Chinese. Oh, I said Italian, but if they had something that induced this acute SARS-like effect, and then they've got thousands of samples to hand, including the People's Liberation Army, which the Bannon whistleblower alludes to, that this is a chimera virus made by the People's Liberation Army and Zheng Li, and she combines the two known strains, saying it's a chimera of a known strain. There are specific restriction sites that have allowed them to put in this modified spike glycoprotein, and now we find ourselves here. Whereas if you take the miners hypothesis, you don't have to do a lot of the early steps of the manuscript which she published.
Oh, sure, now, it's a shortcut, as it were.
Yeah, it's a shortcut, and I would sort of take the view that in order to get anywhere with holding people to account is to probably say that, well, okay, rather than deliberately making it from scratch, they got this from miners who went into these bat caves, very probably to clean them out for the expeditions of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, right?
Entirely likely.
and so in this context, okay, when we see that there's this very sketchy provenance to the virus, there's this very sketchy professional network geared towards trying to push the public perception in a particular direction. The mainstream media has gone along with that, and the fact that we could be in a situation that is way more complex than is being led on, excuse me, and the fact that no one is talking about it, and in fact is being actively silenced or censored, I would say tells you where you need to be looking, right? So forget the psyop of the David Icks and the Andrew Kaufmans, forget the mainstream story. What is it that you're not allowed to discuss? And it's this gain of function element within the construct of it being a bio warfare type agent. And if once you accept that premise, and then the fact that we're dealing with a virus which has this extraordinary spectrum of responses, including the ability to hijack the emotional centers of the brain, and I would say that you can start to look at the current circumstances gripping the United States in a new way, right? And it's a way that they don't want you to look at it, because what they're trying to do with this next generation warfare is a lot of it is psyops to control populations and push them in particular directions to make or essentially to keep the population calm,
Well, yeah,
which
if people were to understand the gravity of the situation, excuse me, if people were to understand the gravity of the situation, it would it would shine a light into those same dark corners, and there are things that we're not meant to be seeing right now.
yeah, and it comes down to, look, even the president said last week that he knew how serious it was, 5 times worse than the most dangerous flu, and he knew that, and his decision was to play it down and to not panic the public, particularly in this election year. And again, whether that was the right tactical move or not, I think even under the best of circumstances, if you tell the citizenry of the United States and the West in general that, hey, a particularly pernicious WMD seems to have fallen out or arisen out of China, and we were already in a tough trade war with China, and now we've just stepped up the game with respect to how serious this is, especially when you take into consideration the fallout of what's pinned on SARS-CoV-2. Shut down your economy, the mass infection, and potentially distorting or twisting the minds of those who have been infected, such that they become easier to push into positions like or ideological movements like Black Lives Matter, and it's not just Black Lives Matter, it would be the converse to that as well. And then you start saying, well, it's got attributes of airborne rabies at some level. People would lose their shit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of the classic argument against why we won't tell everyone that there's aliens. They'll all just go crazy. Well,
Mm,
I mean,
mm.
maybe so, maybe no, but I mean, in this case, we can look at it direct. Well, look at what happened in Hawaii. I want to say, what, 2 years ago, when the air raid siren accidentally went off. I mean, the place went
Oh yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
loony. I mean, it went crazy. It's
Yes.
like we're all going to die. Well, I mean, we had
Mm,
some things happen there that would not normally ever happen
mm.
because people are like, it's the end. Screw it. Might as well let it all burn.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly unhealthy societally because even if the odds of us actually being at that crossover point where it really is the end are incredibly low. I mean, we're at a point now where we can save ourselves from about anything if we really want to. And now, if you have a wealth of people just screaming that the sky is falling and going around and burning down all your cities, well, it's significantly harder to do that. And then that falls into the same category as, earlier reference. You want to take advantage of this tragedy. And we have seen it. We have seen it in spades. Authoritarians of every stripe have taken this opportunity to increase their authority.
Yep. And in every one of those cases and scenarios, it's not a binary of viruses existing or not. Right, which is where I sort of have been playing into this story. That the authoritarian grab could have happened under any circumstances. And say, for example, the missile at Hawaii had been real rather than I'm not even sure what it was. It was just a false alarm, right?
Apparently somebody hit the wrong button, which is so incredibly asinine in my mind. But nonetheless, saying it was real.
Right, and under those circumstances, you see the inch forward of the of those that would try to, and this is the key word, profit from the situation, and we're seeing many people profit right now, and it's disturbing to me because at a scientific level, that's why it was forced retirement, but sort of looking back, I don't want to go back to what was very obviously a corrupt system.
To change the perception of reality.
Where people were, there were in groups and out groups, and and they were trying to game the system with respect to how they got their grants and how grants were used were disgusting. And we just got into how the head chair of a department yesterday, and this is at a non-profit university in the US, can be earning over $500,000 a year, right? Where they've got an army of slave labor below them, of undergraduates, graduates, postdocs, and these
not just these slave labor. You have a better way to say it would be an army of devotees or cultists, even depending on how deep some of these people have gone.
Yeah. And look, man, I was there. I really bought into the whole idea of science as this gentleman's endeavor of a gentleman's pursuit for truth. And I was lucky that I just somehow got through the system where I was studying something that was highly interesting for me because it sort of got at the causality of action and behavior in a very reproducible manner. But it overlapped with Tourette's. And so Tourette's wasn't a big target, if you like, where the big research dollars went. So I was considered competent at what I do, and then I was sort of left alone to pursue what it is that I wanted to do because it had uses, okay? But I was still in the meetings where I could watch people who were supposed to be holding the ethics of the scientific pursuit as their touchstone or guidestone, and very, very obviously falling way short of those demands.
Well,
and
I mean, we can just look at the infiltration of critical theory into real science and see just how bad that's gotten. I mean, not to mention any of the legitimate craziness out of like some of the schools in Africa, like where we need to decolonize science and we need more indigenous science. As much as I am, into the occult and super science and, infirm science, there's a line. There is absolutely a line, and that is crossing it so far that it's patently ridiculous.
Yeah, you have to. There is an objective reality, right?
Right.
And how we view that is, incumbent upon the the environment that your neural networks had to adapt to through life. But I do think we we were getting it right for very long periods of time, and I can look at how science was done 100 years ago, 150 years ago, where it was a sort of single man's pursuit in his library or office, and they were sort of making observations, etc. And there wasn't this financial poison running through the system that would would would.
It
I don't want to say
incentivizes activist science.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Because I was going to say corruption, but it's the wrong word to use. It's incentivizing specific approaches to carrying out the scientific method.
Well,
And
as a matter of fact, we went into this just last week here on kind of how the climate change consensus is, well, a consensus of particular scientists.
and that's a gravy train that they got onto, that they've managed to build for themselves.
There is carbon dollars. Seriously? I mean, again, the balls on these people.
Yeah, very, very much the chutzpah.
Yes, indeed. They have a great deal of chutzpah. They are, I'm sure one might even say they are a mensch, at least amongst themselves.
Indeed. And like I say, these things are not new to people, right? But right now, it's so in your face, and the chaos so immense, because all those things that were supposed to be taken for a given, right? Your social contract through which we were brought up, and I'll use my own personal view. I'll leverage that in here, that science provided this avenue through which we were able to differentiate ourselves from the worser elements of our being, right? So in my mind, I could almost argue that it had a transcendental component to it, because it aimed at getting towards a truth.
Well, a way of framing
kind.
the better natures, or a way of framing the better angels of our nature.
And I had a misspent youth. I saw how easy it was to go down those wrong paths, and it was the commitment to trying to better myself through doing science that led me to do neuroscience, etc. And it was the fact that those misspent years as a youngster were with psychedelics, etc. But they weren't leading me to the enlightenment that I thought was available. When you're peaking off a few hundred micrograms of LSD, there's other. No, that's not how you speak to Daddy. What do you say? Oh, sorry about that. That's
No
how
problem.
about that?
Hello, young man.
He said, "Close the door." Synchronistic emergence of reality there, just as I was reaching I felt a very important point, which was that everyone can see these things, right? And psychedelics is a shortcut, a quick way to sort of lift the veil. But if once you've got the message, I think it was, I'm not sure who said it, maybe Timothy Leary. Once you've got that message, you need to hang up the phone, right? And you sort of structure towards that. And that's how I ended up doing what I was doing in neuroscience, and I wanted to understand the causal nature of how did thought action emerge in the brain, and that in my mind, it's not that long ago, but it was before the subversion had really kicked into high gear as we're seeing it right now. Should still be an ideal that we aim for. And I don't know
The
how you're.
pursuit of science, as opposed to what might be called scientism,
Mhm.
is more the truth. I guess the true way, you might say, is the pursuit of science and the rejection of scientism. Science is not in and of itself a god and should never be seen that way. It is, like so many other things, a tool, and any tool can be corrupted and used wrong. And you have to be an adult, really.
Yeah, and so perhaps we could use an example of those we're quick to point the finger at.
Sure.
And I spent several years in the Middle East, in Israel, and I got to know the culture not overtly well, but I felt I had a good run-in with the good and the bad. Okay,
Sure.
but those that sort of engage in the Kabbalistic type teachings, etc., the people that I spoke to about those things, they always said, well, these are teachings that you get when you're supposed to be like sort of middle-aged man. You're supposed to have responsibilities, and you're supposed to be able to
You're supposed to
better
have a
balance.
framework of a world into which to place these things, is what I'm kind of
Yes,
gathering.
yeah,
And it's
and
going in too early, and we're breaking people, right?
yes, very much. And so I would say that all the issues with science, it's a powerful tool, and what we're doing is we're handing that tool over to those that haven't had the wisdom to learn how to properly use it. And in the discussion I had yesterday, I sort of made a plea that science should be an almost monastic type pursuit, so that you can be sure that those who are its spokespeople are.
Well, you want
Uh,
spokesmen and not adherents.
I'm sorry, say that again.
You want a spokesman and not an adherent. You don't want someone who's going to proselytize. You want someone who's going to teach.
Yeah, yeah, and you want to, and you want to be sure that that person's motives are grounded in the health of the society in general. And
Or at least
if you've
some
got,
basic and real truth.
yeah,
At a bare minimum.
at a bare minimum, yes, we would like someone to be describing reality to us. But to take us a sort of trope that the first computer virus, was written by Bill Gates, right? And then there's a whole industry made of them building better mousetraps, and who's writing those viruses for them to use the mousetraps on, and the
More money in
the
treating cancer than curing it.
right, and there's a lot of things that science needs to be held responsible for, and as someone who was engaged in the scientific process, I like to think I still am. You don't require an institute to still do science, and I've learned that the lab I've got all the data I was ever going to get, really. So it's about how I use that experience to help bring something approximating truth to a general audience. And I'm trying to do that with this concept that your mind is at stake when you think you might be just dealing with
And we're not just
viral
talking about an
pneumonia.
info war on for your mind here. I mean, quite
Right.
literally, neurological damage is a very, very legitimate and very real concern.
Yes, yeah, and that's the message that isn't getting out
And
right
the worst
now.
part too, we don't know how long this lasts. These could
Right,
be permanent injuries.
yeah, and the fact that it's what they're already honing in on it being a quiescent infection that could be ongoing. It leads to hypoxia in the brain, small regions of hypoxia that go beyond the initial phases of the illness, it didn't seem to affect you that much, and now you're holding this reservoir uh, in the central nervous system. AIDS hides in the central nervous system. Right? It's a neurotropic agent, and once you stop taking your um, protease inhibitors, they will come to the uh, it'll start picking up again, and you'll be symptomatic and spreading the infection. And with, like you say, when there's this info or this next generation warfare that's built around psyop control of information, and also now there are agents that are released that directly impact your brain, we've suddenly found ourselves in a whole new territory. The next level of the simulation has kicked in, right? You're onto level 2 right now, and these are the the emergent rules of the game that are coming into view. And um, like I say, I don't have the full answers for how to sort of navigate it beyond saying, one, use science, the methodology of science, as best you can. If you're struggling with a particular element of it, seek out someone who can help answer it for you. I try to do that. Um, and like I say, there's parts of science that I can't do. I'm not a physicist. I'm not a chemist, right? I defer to expertise where I need it, much like you would take your car to the mechanic and not your hairdresser. Okay,
Certainly.
so you were going to say something?
Oh, just certainly, yes, I'm absolutely agree.
Okay, so the um, so this second or this next gen warfare we're in, I would point back to something that I said earlier, which is if it's not part of this pandemic move towards this one world government, my other thought or hypothesis would be that we're staring down the barrel of a war that's been ongoing that we've been blissfully unaware of, and it's making itself shown to us right now. And that is more my concern than this idea of um, pandemics and one world governments. Um, Maybe I'm being short-sighted in that, because if there's no doubt, like the Second World War, if it kicks off, and then you'll end up with a new equivalent of the UN, etc., and there's a whole a whole bunch of uh, elements that you need to keep your eye on all the time. And I think right now we need to be more focused on the immediate, which is, okay, uh, guys in the US, you need you've got all this chaos, and you might, I don't know if how many of your listeners are on the Antifa side.
I can't imagine very many,
Presumably,
but nonetheless, it is always important to address anyone that might tune in.
right. And the point to keep in mind is that, okay, and under this next gen warfare scenario hypothesis, you have to think, where am I being manipulated all the time? Don't take what I say and just go with it and then repeat it or regurgitate it to someone else. Uh, Go back, find out if there is truth to what it is that I'm saying. Speak to me directly. I'll try to answer all questions, and Which reminds me, I'm just going to say this in this stream right now in the hope of reaching one person who's tried to contact me, and I've lost the contact, and it's important because it involved his wife, and he was looking for help with his wife with neurological issue. Please, I know you sent me a Twitter. If you're listening, if you could send that again. I don't see it in my inbox. Just to let you know, I did write to my colleague to see if there was help. None that I could find, but there are other avenues in which I could help you. So if you are listening, please reach out again. Like I say, I've missed his email. So that public service announcement aside,
and if somehow you are following me and this gets to you through my podcast, get in contact with me and I will get you in touch.
Right, please do. It seems quite sort of serious, but I mean, I think I've sort of given the big picture setup as it is from my side. I don't know if you have any questions. Or
there's not a lot of disagreement in between us. I mean, if I had my co-host here, we might be able to get into a little bit more of the science of it. But I mean, we're largely on the same page across the board on this. I mean, there's room for nuance, obviously, but I mean, there are more important issues, as it were, right now to be considered than the nuance of the situation, you might say.
Yeah. And that's what I'm trying to tell people right now. It's okay discussing the merits of terrain theory, etc., for example, or even the philosophy of medicine. But right now, that's not the time. You're in a situation where
we are in an existential crisis. Perhaps that is a bit of an overstatement, but perhaps it isn't. And the fact that it might not be is reason enough to consider that it might be.
I don't think it's being verbose to say that it is an existential crisis. I've never seen the US. I mean, you could say there's parallels to the 1960s.
The nearest parallel we can find to this is the Civil War. I mean, quite literally.
But those are existential crises, and of course the time will pass, and we'll eventually get through this. But there's going to be pain and learning along the way. And hopefully not. It's not all pain. And learning should be a liberating experience. And, well, like I say, I think, it's such a dynamic situation that I think we'll be having to keep visiting this to keep up to date with the latest information. There's I didn't get to. I was gonna touch on it, but we did a stream on one paper this week which basically showed that the SARS-CoV-2 agent affects people of Western hunter-gatherer genotype rather than Asian genotypes.
I've heard some mention of this, basically as a complete aside from the ACE2 binding.
No, this was dependent on ACE2.
Really?
And it was in. I'll send you the paper.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to see that.
But basically, I'll probably just have it quick to hand here, actually. So, do I? I'll have to look, not bore people. So.
No worries. Just get me a link at some point. I really would be curious to see that.
Yeah, and anyway, the point was that it shows that it ticked off another box of what we would describe as a biological agent that could be used for nefarious purposes, right? That the Chinese can pull the pin on the grenade if they know the impact on them is going to be minimal. Yet on the in the West, it's going to be way more problematic.
Well, while we've still got a second, actually, this is probably a question you can answer. I've heard that the what would you say? Your generally African haplogroups are more easily susceptible. Specifically, the African and I guess Africoid types would be more easily infected with this. I've heard this coming out just recently, and it's a big verboten topic, is what I'm hearing.
Yes. So there was a study in JAMA, I want to say a week or two ago, where the people who conducted the study titled it "Race/Ethnicity Differences in Transfection with SARS-CoV-2 Related to Transmembrane Serine Protease Molecule 2, TMSPR2, they call it." And it caused a flurry of indignation among the woke scientists of the world that JAMA would have a headline with the word race in it, where apparently the politically correct way of saying it is ethnicities.
Oh, of course. Well, there's no such thing as a bell curve anyway, so, right.
Right. And this is, again, this is woke science rearing its ugly head. Races is a finer phrase to use. It's them that have made it a loaded phrase through critical theory. And I think when you keep undermining the meaning of words and you keep putting it through the critical theory mincer, you're going to end up with this scenario where people are unable to or they're going to be unable to find solid ground beneath their feet at a intellectual and cognitive level.
Well, if you dissect the truth to a far enough point, nothing's true.
Right, and there's
and
always
when you have
some
no base, all you're doing is just falling.
Yeah, and this is, I would say the psyop extends to the. And the classic example for me is the flat Earth phenomenon. How they've taken that and it's been
it's a
weaponized.
Mind killer. I mean, it's such an amazing tool, or even a weapon in its own right.
Because you're able to coalesce a community that normally wouldn't be able to talk to each other because of geographical limitations, but here you've got them able to communicate readily and directly on the internet. They're actively sought out by people, and there's nothing wrong to question the shape of the earth per se, right? But it's when you're suspending your faculties such that you're not looking at all the evidence, right? And you're only taking evidence which confirms or fits your own hypothesis. You're not doing science then.
Well, you're turning your science into a god of the gaps, and you're making gaps where none even exist in the first place.
Yeah, that's a very eloquent way of putting it. And I would say those who are watching the flow of information across the internet probably saw how successful that was. And in the construct of us being in this next generation warfare, where they pretty much knew in October that there had been a release that they need to muddy the waters, and they know they're going to get a captive audience if they can come out with something. Well, I would put because terrain theory is not wrong per se, because all that means is you've got healthy tissue. The idea that you can create life forms within your own bloodstream with that should have, as far as a reductive science has shown, each piece of flora and fauna has unique genomes. You shouldn't be making those in your body, right? We understand them to be external because they have unique genomes that can be used to classify them. But the extensions of terrain theory goes to this idea of abiogenic pleomorphisms, that if you look at blood under a dark field microscope, you see there are these what they call somatids, or the mycozyma, something like that. They've got a bunch of names for them, but the studies have shown that they're particle of plasma membranes. And what they do is, because you have to think of the plasma membrane as in an ionic medium, what it does is it's always trying to sort of balance its charge. And yeah, it can sort of clip and form and join and make sort of spheroids that would sort of classify as exosome. And under conditions, they can become bilobed. And they've made this whole life cycle that can occur in the blood through looking at dark field microscopy, that the blood spontaneously generates pathogens that are there to clear out toxins. So if you're suffering from cholera, your body has made cholera, or viruses. They would argue that SARS-CoV-2, your body has made that virus and is using it to clear toxins from your system, right? And that's such a deviation from objective reality that you've moved that base again, like the flat earthers have managed to do to themselves. And it's very obviously a good psychological operation to run.
Well, it is. I mean, if at a bare minimum, it's a hell of a grift. But then on the next level, I mean, you've got an issue that you can drive a societal wedge here. I mean, you can set the world on fire, quite literally.
Well, yeah. I mean, hopefully you don't have to look out your window to see it. But I mean,
thankfully not here, but not all that far.
Right. So, well, I hope it remains far. We probably should save this for the next conversation, because we could get into who do we think the subverters are? What are they trying to achieve? And what are their end goals? And people have different theories about that, and we can't ignore those that buy into prophecy, etc. These are all elements in the equation of the now, and we need to navigate our way.
Well, to drop an interesting note on that very specific topic, there are not enough people talking about the Shincheonji death cult.
Right?
Not enough at all.
And that's where I'm pretty sure I got my dose of SARS from. Before anyone even knew about SARS, I was in Daegu in South Korea in November, December.
Oh shit!
Right,
wow.
And I came back from there. I'd been asked to help with an engineering problem with someone's DBS project, and I came back from there, and then I got hit by that illness, and that wasn't just a flu, bro, and I nearly didn't make it out of it. And just by chance, at the sort of peak in the symptoms, I made my wife get aspirin, and I think that turned it around for me, especially as now we know that it's a coagulopathy. And I'd been using sort of acetaminophen and regular painkillers, and mine was the gastrointestinal version, and the not so much respiratory. But then I was left with dyspnea for a long time. It took about 8 months. Well, I want to say August was about the time that my breathing came back to normal. I've got chest pain all the time now, and like I say, many people get through it okay, but I believed in a society where we had the cultural understanding that those that maybe aren't the healthiest, I'd been taken out with a head injury, so I'm already suffering from TBI, etc. And I went through a lot of the neurological components of the disease during those peak moments, hallucinations. I didn't know where I was.
That is not a flu. That is not a cold.
No. And I was lucky, lucky to get through. And that, again, that sort of motivated me to get better and well, speak to the public. And I'm still trying to get better. So I was recovering from head injury. I mean, I've made progress with that, but I feel like I'm set back a couple of years because of the run-in with SARS. And Shincheonji cult had a big factor in spreading it, not only from Daegu and South
worldwide.
Korea.
I mean, you can find their churches at each of the individual super spreader events. Really.
Mm, mm. And let's not forget that Korean woman grabbing hold of the Pope. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
Right, and he had to sort of smash her hand away.
Yeah, I remember making a snarky comment on Twitter about that.
No, so there was well, I mean, there was talk of the Pope being ill, and there was even that very bizarre footage of him appearing at the window doing his thing, and then it just sort of switching off like a hologram. Right? There were all sorts of oddities going on around then, and look, the Shincheonji Church that's a big one related to the disease itself, but in the big geopolitical game, there's this whole component of the Abrahamic prophetic. You call it the sphere, if you like, the eschatology of Judaism, Christianity, Islam,
or even beyond that. Basically, your how should I say, your end of the world types, your the ones that are actively working to bring things down because they have a prophecy that says it has to happen, or that they have a prophecy that it says it has to happen this way for X.
Yeah.
Where X is the return of the demiurge, perhaps the manifestation of the Godhead, what have you.
And usually them being top dogs for,
and
for eternity.
Exactly that. Which, I will give a little bit of credit to the Mormons. They're pretty good on that. It's like, hey, no, we all work together here. And now, if you work better here, there's maybe there's 200,000 of you that are going to get a nice planet. The rest of you, well, we'll figure something out. But if you do really good and you're a really good person, there might be a planet for you. You can be a god too. It's a pretty sweet deal, but you got to work pretty hard for it.
Yeah, or you can be one of the chosen tribe, and all the Edomites that you spare will be worshipping you. And Esau, is it Esau or Esau? I think. But anyway, the whole idea of the sort of temple cults of Judaism, Christianity, and how that part of the world has been leveraged by these prophecies, particularly the American Christian Bible Belt.
I mean, who's the guy that's had a new "the world is ending"? Every year now? I think the guy's finally fallen out of favor after about 2013 when it finally didn't happen and there just wasn't any other listed prophecy that he could fall back on to call for a new end of the world.
Well, he just needed to wait a few years. They're all coming out at it now, and
well, we have a whole new range of grifters now. All the old ones kind of retired, so.
Well, they made their coin, and they've gone to sit on the Mount of Olives and watch the ushering in. And look, I need to get on because I promised the kids I would play, but I'll sort of leave it on this, and we can pick it up the next time. But when I was in Israel, they had the temple shop or shop front. It was basically, you could go in there and they had a replica of how they wanted to build the new temple for the returning Moshiach. right? And at that time, I want to say it was it Ariel Sharon? But basically, he kicked off an intifada, right? They put in it was, well, one of the prime ministers. It might have been, no, Ariel Sharon was in a coma, and I think it was Benjamin Netanyahu. He walked onto the Temple Mount, and it caused a long intifada. And at that time, they had a ceremony to make the cornerstone of the temple, the new cornerstone of the temple. And this was 12 years ago now, 13 years ago. And what I've seen is it's just picked up speed. So we've gone from them selling novelty shekels with a temple on to them pushing medals of Trump as the image of, or the return of King Cyrus to set the Jews free again. And you can buy a temple medal or shekel from them, right? And now they've got their peace deal, and everyone's sort of thinking these prophecies have come to the fore, and now's the time to that their side's going to win, right? And you have to think you can't discount it in part of this complex scenario that we're in, because I keep going, but I'd leave it on this point. Although it looks like it came out of Wuhan, and I believe it was Wuhan, we can't know for sure. And
well, we can say this with certainty: there was Canadian research that we know was stolen and fed back to Wuhan. There was American research that we know was, if not stolen, provided to Wuhan. And I've heard of EU labs that also were targeted. So, I mean, there's a lot to go on there.
Yep. And, it's something, well, I think we should sort of dig into it more. There's this whole thing of the tech transfer, what's happening with the Asian continent, etc., where Israel sees itself in that. And I think a lot of these grifters are using prophecy right now for very, very specific means, and all these people being played will be, they'll just be dispensed with, much like a
useful idiot is a useful idiot, and a useful idiot is the first against the wall.
Yes, that is a very, very fitting statement. And again, to anyone that's listening, do not get pulled into what's going on right now. Don't let the system catch you in any way right now. Keep in the shadows.
Water, as our man Bruce Lee once said.
Yes, very, very much. And in this sense, look after yourself and your family. It's your job right now to look after yourself and your family. And I think that one of the solutions that I have that we get through this is you build these, as we can right now, these virtual villages, communities, where you've got multiple lookouts right now that are able to start aggregating information. And so I encourage everyone to go to my Discord. I don't know how Evan is sort of doing his Discord, if it's public or private. But
I haven't really got a public aspect to that setup yet, but I'm working on it. It's still kind of small.
Okay, so like I say, people who are trying to get a coherent message out that
I am in Kevin's Discord though, so you can look me up there.
Okay, so maybe just tell everyone you're the fake guy Dan, right? So,
yeah, I'm that fake guy Dan everywhere on social media except Facebook, because fuck that place.
Right. So, like I say, I think a lot of what we have to do right now is prepare, right? And there's only so many buckets of MREs you're gonna need, and there's only so many you can hold, and so many you can afford. I think it's about finding the those who have a intellectual need to see that we can agree on an objective reality and consensus for what society is supposed to look like, and we're very, very far from that.
Or shall we say, there is an objective truth, and there is a way to make things work, and we're straying quite far from both of those.
Yes, very much so. So I'm going to hang up.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on here. This has been Kevin McCairn. I'll have links to him in the down below. And beyond that, thanks to your chat for tuning in. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, everyone. And I'll just speak to you quickly afterwards, Evan. So
yeah, absolutely.